One of our children prepares for tests by writing questions and answers on little cards. So the question goes on one side and the answer goes on the other. And this is not a study method that we taught them, but it seems to be an effective one. And it means that when a big test is coming up at our house, the kitchen table is covered with questions. So what is a tributary, or what is photosynthesis, or who's the head of state in the British parliamentary system? And I'm not in high school at the moment, but I want to see if I can answer these questions. I kind of like trivia, so I'll often attempt to answer the question and then turn over the card to see if I've got the answer right. Sometimes I have an okay batting average. When we get into AP psychology, I do very poorly indeed. A while back, there was a question sitting on the kitchen table that particularly caught my attention, that particularly intrigued me. It said, what are the three elements of the scientific attitude? I was immediately fascinated with. Do you know the answer to this question, by the way? So you could maybe guess the first element of the scientific attitude. The first element is skepticism. And I would say you probably could have guessed that because it seems to me in sort of popular conversation about science, skepticism is the element that we focus upon. For someone I think who is deep into science, they would use the word skepticism to mean something like the conviction that there are certain things we don't know and perhaps certain things we can't know. In popular conversation about science, I think skepticism means something more like there are only certain reliable ways of getting to the truth. And in particular, the one really reliable way of getting to the truth is through the reproducible experiment. If something is provable via an experiment, it's true. If something is not provable via an experiment, it is not true. So I suspect that is what a lot of folks would mean by skepticism. I suspect that's what a lot of those lawn signs are getting at when they say science is real. I hope nobody's attached to one of those signs. I hope I'm not poking a nerve here. That it means there's kind of a particular way of finding our way to reality or truth. But then there were two more words on the back of the card that really got me excited about the scientific attitude beyond skepticism. They were curiosity and humility. So skepticism, curiosity, and humility. And I immediately thought to myself, okay, this is an attitude that I could get excited about. We're at the end right now of the Christmas season. We've just entered into the season of Epiphany. We're marking a new calendar year with practices like the chalking of the door to welcome people into our home across the year. We are at the end of a season where we have told familiar and beautiful stories about Mary being visited by an angel and saying yes, about shepherds being visited, perhaps by the same angel, perhaps by different ones, and being drawn to the baby Jesus, about magi coming with their strange gifts, about Mary pondering all of this in her heart. And today, we move forward maybe 30 years in the story, 30 years ahead from the Nativity to the beginning of Jesus' earthly ministry. And we meet John the Baptizer. And even though this is 30 years later, there's this deep continuity with the Nativity. So John, like the shepherds, like this angel that comes to Mary, like the Magi, has this foreknowledge of what is going to happen. Even though Jesus at this point is probably focused on carpentry and hasn't really taught anybody anything yet or done any miracles just yet, John knows that Jesus is going to do something amazing. He says, I am not worthy to untie his shoelaces. So a while back when I was first coming to faith, I guess that's getting to be a while ago now. That's going on 20 years ago when I was first wondering about church. Someone put me onto the writings of the now deceased Bishop John Shelby Spong. And Spong was, at that time, pretty important to me. He was the first writer I had encountered who showed me that you could have both Christianity and criticality. That you could show up in church, you could engage with the Bible, you could say yes to Jesus and still have doubts and still have questions and still have arguments and uncertainties. You could still wrestle with faith. Fundamental image for me is Jacob wrestling with a stranger in the night, and it turns out that the stranger might just be God. Spong was the first one who allowed the possibility that you could have skepticism and yet be a Christian. Prior to that, I had thought that looking at the church from outside and looking at the church as influenced by Jimmy Swaggart on the television of my childhood, I reckoned that that faith was variously anti-intellectual and even immoral in nature. That to come to church, you had to believe 3 impossible things before breakfast, and you had to make the world smaller and say there's certain people I'm going to reject, I'm going to exclude from the love of God, even though I sure think these are lovable folks. And Spong invited me into a bigger world. It was exciting to encounter his writing, and I'm grateful to him. And as time progressed and I spent more time following Jesus imperfectly, deeply imperfectly, but trying to follow Jesus, trying to be a Christian in community, Spong started to feel limited to me. He started to feel like someone who, while he'd shown me this jewel, which was skepticism within faith, I began to feel like he'd been trapped by his skepticism. He would look at things like the nativity story and he would say, stuff like that doesn't happen. And he would then act like he just won an argument. And of course, the irony of that argument is obvious, which is the gospel writers would be the first people to agree with you that stuff like that doesn't happen. They aren't telling you about this story because it's unremarkable. They are telling you about this story because it's very remarkable indeed. Something transformative is happening when God shows up. Stuff that doesn't happen happens. We call this stuff that doesn't happen by the name miracle. And that brings me to curiosity, something that I wanted to discover in addition to skepticism in faith. When I was a young person, and I'm noticing that's a sentence I wrote repeatedly in this sermon. I don't know if this is a sermon in some ways about looking back from middle life and wondering. But when I was a younger person, I probably would have agreed with Spong. Stuff like that doesn't happen. And as I've lived more life and seen more things and spoken to more people, I have become more curious about stuff that doesn't happen. If you've spent any time in a hospice context, if you spent any time with people who are dying, you may have had the experience of hearing from them that they were visited by someone whom you could not see. When Phoebe's dad was dying back in 2015, he got all sorts of visitors. Bob was beloved, and so all these parade of people came to see him. And I remember seeing him, and he shared with us that Rolly and Vi had been to see him. Well, Rolly had been dead for 20 years, and Vi for 5 at this point. I guess you can explain that away if you want to as the sort of ravings of a feverish mind. Although I suspect our ancestors, if you told them that story, would have said, of course someone who is dying had the heavenly host showed up and said, we're going to help you get ready for your journey. I was just reading an article about someone who got lost in the woods and had this experience that has happened to so many different people. It has a name. This is variously called the third person or third man. They were lost in the woods, and another presence was with them and kept them company in their lostness and helped them find their way to safety. It's called the third person, probably drawing on T.S. Eliot's Wasteland, where he talks about the Shackleton disaster, getting lost in the Antarctica, and for Shackleton there was another presence there with them in their journeys. A thing that doesn't happen to these folks. And doing this job, having the privilege of doing this job, I often sit with folks, and often when we're in a one-on-one context, their voice will drop into a whisper and they'll say, "I never tell anyone this, but," and they'll proceed to share a God sighting, a moment in which they caught a glimpse of the divine in some way that has changed their life. I was visiting with Leroy Patton earlier this week, who many of you know and love. Leroy's the longest-serving member of the choir. Leroy, if you're worshiping with us at home, blessings to you. We love you and miss you and hope you're healing and hope to see you soon. Leroy was talking about his vocation as a teacher and later on as a school administrator. That's what he did before he was retired. And he had passionate opinions about teaching. It's as animated as I've seen him in some time. And he talked about the importance of children being taught and then made a distinction that I've never heard before. He said, taught, not told. Stop and think about that one for a second. To be told is sort of to have knowledge poured into your gas tank, right? Like a pump. And you just sort of, that's an image, I guess. It's a kind of pedagogy. You just get filled up. Whereas to be taught is to receive something, but how would we put this? Retain your curiosity, retain your ability, retain your skepticism in the best sense of that word, retain your ability to wrestle with it and learn and build upon it. And that brings me to humility. The capacity to say, I don't know, or I'm not sure, or there's limits to my knowledge, to say, I may be wrong about this. I think it's Aquinas who, at the end of his life, so Aquinas has written, he's sort of like the Beatles of theology, right? He's just like cranked out one amazing work after another, and he's near the end of his life. And he says to his friends, everything I've written, it's just dust. Now, he said, even during his lifetime, he knew he was a big deal. It's not. I don't know if he guessed that his works would still be read centuries later, but he knew he was a big deal. And he said, everything, it's just dust. What are we to make of that? Was that just kind of a sad moment of self-deprecation late in the life? Or was he right about that? That to be humble in the fullest sense is to realize that the stuff we know is just kind of grains compared with how much is out there. Aquinas was like this guy ascending a mountain, and it's early on in his climb, he believed the mountain was everything there was to know. And when he would get to the peak, he was like, now I know everything. And somewhere during his climb, he looked around and realized that the horizon was receding and receding and receding, and there were all these other mountains around. I don't know anything. I don't know why I was thinking about this, but earlier this week I was thinking about that hateful job interview question, what is your greatest weakness? And like it's such a bad question. And I realized it's hard. Okay, so here's a third time I'm going to say when I was younger. It's hard for me now in a different way than it would have been when I was first interviewing for jobs at age, whatever age you are, when you're first 18, right? First interviewing for jobs, I found the question hard because I couldn't think of a weakness. And today, I would find the question hard because I can think of too many weaknesses. Like, I don't know, I wouldn't even really know where to start. Isn't there, how does the how does the song go? I was so much younger then, I'm older than that now. Like that's, yeah, it's a Dylan song, isn't it? I think so much older then. Thank you, Avril. I got it backwards. Yeah, I was so much older then. I'm younger than that now. Yes, yeah. That's a real thing. To become humble is to say there are limits, and Jesus does this. Jesus accepts this humility. I wonder actually if this is why I was so drawn to the scientific attitude is in addition to being beautiful, it actually struck me as very Christ-like in nature. Science, as we understand it now, is shaped by the Enlightenment, didn't really exist during Jesus' time. But those three aspects, skepticism and curiosity and humility, are to be found throughout Jesus' ministry. Skepticism in the best sense because he is constantly arguing with a tradition that he loves. Not in a flippant way, not in a thumb your nose way, but in I remember meeting a philosopher who said, I take it as a compliment when you argue with me, because it means you're taking this, what I have to say, very seriously indeed. So Jesus is arguing with Scripture, arguing with his fellow believers, sometimes even arguing with the one whom he calls the Father, asking why he's been given a job and saying, like, if this cup can pass with me, I want to let it go, if it could. Jesus is curious insofar as he wants to be taught, not told. He's been told things. I think really famously, Jesus has been told that the love of God is small and constrained. The love of God is limited to people in his tribe. And then he meets this woman from Cana. He meets this Canaanite woman. And he has this aha moment where he becomes curious and says, oh my God, the love of the Father, the kingdom is way bigger than I ever imagined. He learns. He says yes to curiosity. And Jesus is humble insofar as he's willing to say, I'm not sure. There's a moment, I think it's in the Gospel of Mark, those of you who know Scripture well can tell me, where Jesus is talking about the end of days, about, when everything is going to end. And Jesus says, I don't know when it's going to happen. Nobody knows except the Father. This is a passage that embarrasses some people because they want Jesus to be omniscient all the time. But actually, there is this humility, this willing to say, I'm not certain. Manifested, I would say, in his storytelling. So often, someone will ask him a question, and rather than offering a hard answer, he will offer a story or a question of his own, a deeply humble and curious and skeptical, in the best sense of the word, way of encountering reality. What would it look like if we were to have the scientific attitude, which, dare I say, might be the attitude, one of the attitudes of Jesus? What would it look like if we were skeptical in the best sense of that? If we wrestled with what we had received and added to it and built upon it? If our skepticism extended to ourselves, to our own convictions? What if we were curious? If we were open to possibility? If we chose to be taught rather than told? And what if we were humble and said there are limits to what I can know? It's not to say the search doesn't matter. It matters deeply. But it is to say that for now we see through a glass darkly. So go forth to be skeptical, curious, and humble. Who knows what we might discover if we were to do so? Who knows how many things that don't happen might happen if we were ready to see them? Who knows how many miracles we might witness.